Winter had always been my favorite season. There's something comforting about the way snow blankets the world, muffling sounds and casting everything in a pure white glow. So, when my old college friend, Sarah, invited me to her cabin in the countryside for a weekend retreat, I jumped at the chance. The drive was long, and as the sun set, the snow began to fall more heavily. My car's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the falling flakes. I had the radio on low, playing some soft classical music, trying to keep the atmosphere serene despite the worsening weather. The road twisted and turned, and soon I realized I was lost. I hadn't seen another car for hours. My phone had no signal, and the GPS was useless out here. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that I could always turn around and find my way back to the main road. But then, out of nowhere, my car sputtered and died. I was stranded. The snow continued to fall, heavy and relentless. I bundled up in my coat and decided to venture out on foot. There had to be a house or some form of civilization nearby. After about 15 minutes of trudging through the snow, I saw it. An old, imposing house, standing alone in the vast, white landscape. It looked abandoned, but there was a faint glow of light coming from one of the windows. Desperation trumped caution, and I made my way to the front door. I knocked, but there was no answer. The door creaked open under my touch, revealing a dark, musty hallway. "Hello," I called out, but only my echo responded. I stepped inside, grateful for the shelter from the cold. The interior was eerily quiet, and the air felt thick and heavy. The walls were lined with old portraits, their eyes following me as I moved. I found a fireplace in the living room and managed to light a fire with the wood stacked nearby. The warmth was immediate and soothing, but the uneasy feeling in my gut remained. As I explored the house, I found signs of recent habitation: a pot on the stove, a blanket draped over a chair, an open book on a side table. Yet, there was no sign of the occupant. My footsteps echoed on the wooden floorboards, and every creak and groan of the house made me jump. In the dining room, I discovered an old diary lying open on the table. The entries were written in a neat, elegant script, detailing the lives of the family that once lived here. They spoke of harsh winters, isolation, and strange occurrences that plagued the house. One entry, dated December 1923, caught my eye. "The whispers have returned. They come with the wind, slipping through the cracks and crevices, calling our names. We hear them at night, a chorus of lost souls. Father says it's just the wind, but I know better. They want something. They want us." A chill ran down my spine as I read the words. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and causing the house to groan. I tried to shake off the unease and made my way back to the living room, settling in front of the fire, with a blanket wrapped tightly around me. The warmth and exhaustion soon lulled me into a fitful sleep. I was awakened by a faint whispering, barely audible, over the crackling fire. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear. The whispers grew louder, and I could make out my name being called, over and over. "Emily." I jumped up, scanning the room. There was no one there. The whispers continued, coming from all around me. I grabbed a flashlight and ventured into the hallway, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. The whispers led me to the staircase, drawing me upwards. I hesitated at the bottom step, my instincts screaming at me to leave, but curiosity and a strange compulsion pushed me forward. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound blending with the whispers. As I reached the top, the temperature dropped noticeably. My breath fogged in the air, and the sense of being watched grew stronger. At the end of the hallway, a door stood slightly ajar. The whispers were louder now, almost urgent. I pushed the door open and stepped into the attic. It was cold and dark, filled with old, dusty furniture covered in sheets. In the corner, a single candle flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. On a small table next to the candle was another diary, this one more worn and fragile. I opened it carefully, the pages brittle under my fingers. The entries were short, frantic, detailing the family's final days. The whispers won't stop. They grow louder each night, demanding we listen. Father has barricaded the doors, but I fear it's too late. They are inside with us now. Mother has fallen ill, and Father is losing his mind. I hear them all the time now, even when the wind is still. The last entry sent a shiver down my spine. We can't escape. They have us trapped. The whispers are no longer just voices. They are here, with us, in the shadows, watching, waiting. I fear we won't survive the night. As I finished reading, the whispers reached a fever pitch. The candle flickered violently, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The shadows seemed to coalesce, forming a dark, indistinct shape. It moved closer, the air growing colder with each step. I backed away, my heart racing, but there was nowhere to go. The attic door slammed shut, trapping me inside. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices calling my name. The shadow loomed over me, and I could feel its icy breath on my skin. Desperate, I grabbed the candle and held it out in front of me. The light flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The shape hesitated, as if uncertain, and I took the opportunity to make a run for the door. I fumbled with the handle, finally wrenching it open and stumbling down the stairs. I didn't stop until I was back in the living room, the fire now just a pile of glowing embers. The whispers had faded, but the sense of dread remained. I knew I couldn't stay in the house any longer. Grabbing my coat, I bolted for the front door and plunged into the freezing night. The snowstorm had lessened, and in the distance, I saw the faint glow of headlights. I ran towards them, waving my arms frantically. The car stopped, and an elderly couple emerged, concern etched on their faces. They took me to the nearest town, where I recounted my ordeal to the local authorities. They listened with skeptical expressions, but one old man, the sheriff, seemed to take me seriously. He nodded slowly and told me about the house and the family that had lived there long ago. They had all perished in a fire during a particularly harsh winter, and ever since, strange occurrences had been reported by those who ventured too close. I left town the next day, still shaken by the experience. The whispers had followed me, echoing in my mind. I never spoke of that night again, but the memory haunted me, a constant reminder of the shadows that lurk just beyond the edge of the light. To this day, whenever the wind howls on a cold winter night, I hear them. Faint, ghostly whispers calling my name. And I know, somewhere out there in the snow-covered countryside, the spirits of that old house are still waiting, still watching, and still whispering. Winter had always been my favorite season. There's something about the stillness of snow-covered woods that felt peaceful and serene. So, when my friends and I decided on a winter camping trip in the remote forest, I was all in. We were an experienced group: Kevin, our unofficial leader; Sarah, who could start a fire with just a spark; Mike, always the joker; and me, Emma, the nature enthusiast. The drive up was uneventful, with the chatter of excitement filling the car. We arrived at our chosen campsite just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. The forest was beautiful, a winter wonderland. We quickly set up our tents and gathered around the campfire, its warm glow a stark contrast to the biting cold. As night fell, the temperature plummeted. We wrapped ourselves in layers and huddled closer to the fire. Kevin started telling stories, as he always did, spinning tales of legendary creatures and haunted woods. It was all fun and games until he mentioned the Wendigo, a creature said to roam these very woods during the harshest winters, preying on those foolish enough to venture into its territory. Supposedly, it was once human, Kevin said, his face illuminated eerily by the firelight. But it's been twisted by hunger, transformed into something monstrous. They say it can mimic voices, lure you into the woods. Once it has you alone, it strikes. Sarah rolled her eyes. Nice try, Kev, but we're not kids anymore. Mike laughed. Yeah, I'm more scared of running out of hot chocolate. Despite the jokes, I felt a shiver run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The forest around us was unnervingly quiet. The only sound, the crackling of the fire and our own voices. As the hours passed, our laughter and chatter died down, and we retreated to our tents, the fire slowly dwindling to embers. I woke in the middle of the night to a strange sound, a distant, guttural howl that echoed through the trees. I lay still, straining to hear more. The forest was silent again, but the uneasy feeling lingered. I eventually drifted back to sleep, haunted by unsettling dreams. The next morning, the forest seemed normal again, though the unease from the previous night clung to me. We spent the day hiking and exploring, the fresh snow crunching under our boots. Mike and Kevin goofed off, throwing snowballs and daring each other to jump off small cliffs into snowdrifts. It was easy to forget the eeriness of the night before in the daylight. As dusk approached, we returned to camp, cold and tired, but in good spirits. Sarah had managed to catch some fish in a nearby stream, and we cooked them over the fire, the smell of food comforting and familiar. That night, the temperature dropped even further, and the wind picked up, howling through the trees. We stayed close to the fire, the conversation subdued. I kept glancing into the dark woods, half expecting to see something moving among the trees. Kevin noticed and nudged me. "Hey, you okay?" he asked. "Yeah, I don't know. These woods feel different at night." He nodded, understanding. It's easy to let your imagination run wild out here. But we're fine, it's just the wind. I nodded. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. We decided to call it a night early, retreating to the warmth of our sleeping bags. I fell asleep quickly, but it wasn't long before I was jolted awake by a noise outside my tent. It sounded like footsteps, crunching in the snow, moving slowly around our campsite. Heart pounding, I listened intently. The footsteps stopped right outside my tent. I held my breath, barely daring to move. Then, I heard a voice, soft and familiar. "Emma, come outside." It was Kevin. I exhaled, relieved, and unzipped the tent. The cold air rushed in, and I stepped out, but there was no one there. The campsite was eerily silent, the fire reduced to faintly glowing embers. I turned, confused. "Kevin," I whispered. No response. The unease from earlier came rushing back. I hurried to Kevin's tent and unzipped it, only to find him sound asleep inside. Panic set in. If Kevin was here, then who had called my name? I stumbled back to my tent, trying to make sense of it. That's when I saw it. A set of footprints in the snow, circling our campsite, stopping right outside each of our tents before leading off into the woods. I followed them with my flashlight, dread building with each step. The footprints led deeper into the forest, away from the safety of the camp. I knew I should turn back, but something compelled me to keep going. The trees closed in around me, the darkness almost suffocating. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying faint, almost indistinguishable words. "Emma." I frowned, scanning the woods with my flashlight. The beam caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow darting between the trees. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. "Emma, help us." The voice was clearer now, and I realized with a jolt that it wasn't just Kevin's voice. It was Sarah's and Mike's too, blending together in a haunting chorus. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. I burst back into the campsite, breathless and terrified. The others were awake now, looking at me with concern and confusion. "Emma, what's wrong?" Sarah asked, stepping towards me. Footsteps, voices. "Something's out there," I gasped, pointing towards the woods. Kevin grabbed his flashlight and scanned the tree line. "I don't see anything." I'm not making it up. Someone or something was calling my name. Mike, usually the skeptic, looked shaken. I heard it too. I thought it was just a dream, but Sarah shivered. "Maybe we should leave. Pack up and go back to the car." Kevin nodded. "Yeah, let's get out of here now." We hastily packed our things, the urgency palpable. The wind howled louder, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see a figure lurking in the shadows. We started hiking back towards the road, the cold biting through our layers. The journey felt endless, every snap of a twig making us jump. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees like silent sentinels watching our every move. Finally, after what felt like hours, we saw the faint glow of our car's headlights through the trees. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As we neared the car, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air. It was Mike. He had been trailing behind, and now he was gone. We spun around, our flashlights searching the darkness, but there was no sign of him. "Mike!" Kevin shouted, but there was no response. Panic set in. We rushed back into the woods, calling Mike's name, but the only answer was the howling wind. We spread out, desperate to find him, but deep down, I knew it was hopeless. The Wendigo had claimed its prey. Eventually, we had to make the hardest decision of our lives. We couldn't stay. The risk was too great. With heavy hearts, we returned to the car and drove away, leaving Mike behind. The silence in the car was deafening, each of us lost in our thoughts and guilt. We reported everything to the authorities when we reached town, but Mike was never found. The forest, they said, had a way of keeping its secrets. To this day, I can't forget the whispers, the feeling of being watched. I don't go camping anymore, and I avoid the woods, especially in winter. The memories of that night haunt me, a constant reminder of the shadows that lurk just beyond the edge of the light. And sometimes, when the wind howls outside my window, I still hear their voices, calling my name. Winter had always been my favorite season. I loved the crisp air, the quiet snowfall, and the way everything seemed to sparkle under a blanket of fresh snow. So, when I inherited an old mountain lodge from my estranged uncle, I saw it as the perfect opportunity for a peaceful winter retreat. The lodge was isolated, nestled deep in the forest at the base of a mountain, and surrounded by towering pine trees. It was a grand old building, with tall windows and a steep roof. The locals in the nearby town had warned me that the lodge had a dark history, but I brushed off their superstitions. It was just an old house, and I was ready for a bit of solitude. I arrived on a cold, blustery afternoon. The wind howled through the trees, and snowflakes danced in the air. The lodge loomed before me, dark and silent. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, a wave of cold air greeted me, carrying with it the faint, musty scent of neglect. The interior was grand, but clearly old, with high ceilings, wooden beams, and a massive stone fireplace that dominated the living room. I spent the first few hours unpacking and exploring the lodge. There were dusty portraits on the walls, old furniture covered in white sheets, and countless nooks and crannies to investigate. Despite the cold, I felt a sense of excitement. This was my place now, my retreat from the world. Night fell quickly, and I decided to light a fire in the fireplace. The warmth was welcome, and I curled up on the couch with a book, feeling content. The wind outside picked up, howling like a living thing. The old house creaked and groaned, but I told myself it was just settling noises. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because I was awakened by a strange noise. It was a soft, rhythmic thumping coming from upstairs. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear over the wind. The noise continued, steady and unrelenting. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way to the staircase, each step creaking under my weight. The sound grew louder as I ascended the stairs. It seemed to be coming from the attic. I hesitated, a sense of dread washing over me. But curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed open the door to the attic. The air was even colder here, and the beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing old trunks, broken furniture, and a dusty rocking chair. The rocking chair was moving, slowly back and forth, with no one in it. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped closer, and the chair abruptly stopped. The silence was deafening, and I felt an overwhelming urge to flee. I backed out of the attic, closed the door, and practically ran down the stairs. Back in the living room, I tried to shake off the fear. It was just the wind, I told myself. Just an old chair moving in a drafty house. I stoked the fire and settled back onto the couch, but sleep was elusive. The house seemed to be watching me, every creak and groan amplified in the darkness. The next morning, I decided to explore the grounds, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The snow was deep, and the trees stood like silent sentinels around the lodge. I found an old shed at the edge of the property and decided to take a look inside. The shed was filled with old tools, rusted and forgotten. But what caught my eye was a stack of old newspapers in the corner. The top one was dated from the 1950s, and the headline sent a chill down my spine. Family perishes in lodge fire. Sole survivor declared insane. I read on, learning about a fire that had ravaged the lodge decades ago. The family that lived there had all perished, except for a young boy who had survived, but was later committed to an asylum. The article mentioned strange occurrences and whispers in the night, which the boy claimed were the voices of his dead family. Feeling unnerved, I returned to the lodge. The wind had picked up again, and the house seemed even colder. I decided to build up the fire and spend the evening researching the lodge's history. I found old journals and letters in the study, detailing the family's life before the fire. They spoke of strange noises, cold spots, and a growing sense of dread. As night fell, the sense of unease grew. I kept glancing at the attic door, half expecting to see the rocking chair moving again. The wind howled, and the house seemed to shiver in response. I was about to head to bed when I heard it again. The soft, rhythmic thumping, this time coming from the basement. Every instinct told me to ignore it, but I couldn't. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way to the basement door. The air was even colder here, and the stairs creaked ominously under my weight. The thumping grew louder, echoing off the stone walls. The basement was dark and damp, filled with old crates and cobwebs. In the corner, I saw an old wooden chest, The thumping was coming from inside. My hands shook as I reached for the lid. I lifted it slowly, and the noise stopped. Inside the chest was a small, dusty doll, its glass eyes staring blankly up at me. A wave of cold air rushed past me, and I heard a whisper, faint but clear. "Help us." I dropped the flashlight, its beam casting eerie shadows on the walls. I stumbled back, my mind racing. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices begging for help. I fled the basement, slamming the door behind me. The lodge was filled with the sounds of whispers and creaking floorboards. I grabbed my coat and ran outside, not stopping until I was far from the house. I collapsed in the snow, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't return to the lodge that night. I drove to the nearest town and checked into a motel, my mind racing. The next morning, I contacted a local historian who confirmed the story of the lodge's tragic past. He mentioned that many believed the spirits of the family still lingered, trapped and seeking release. Determined to put the spirits to rest, I returned to the lodge one last time. I gathered the journals, letters, and the doll and took them to the attic. I placed them on the rocking chair and lit a candle. I spoke aloud, telling the spirits that they were free, that they didn't need to stay here anymore. The wind outside howled, and the house seemed to groan in response. The candle flickered, and the whispers grew softer until they faded away entirely. The air felt warmer, and the oppressive sense of dread lifted. I felt a sense of peace settle over the lodge. I left the lodge that day, locking the door behind me. I never returned, but I like to think that the spirits found the peace they were seeking. The lodge now stands empty, a silent sentinel in the snow-covered woods, no longer haunted by the whispers of the past. And sometimes, when the wind howls on a cold winter night, I remember the lodge and the spirits that once called it home. The memories linger, a reminder of the shadows that lurk just beyond the edge of the light, waiting to be set free.